Just a short introduction about what we like to talk about in the next 1 hour maybe. We try to keep it short that you are not too hungry. Okay. The main question we like to approach, the main problematic is like to approach is that all the discussion, scientific discussion about climate change is, to our opinion, are staying in a very unstable, what we call maybe base, foundation. Why? We will talk about that. But in everyday life, we can see about a huge effort about what we call the international community. Today, they started in Bali with what they call a World Water Forum with 30,000 participants. That's why Pak Kemal say that everybody in Indonesia has something to do or not to do with water. Come, included Elon Musk. He's also coming. Also, water is a big business, huh? You must have a radar here that why such person is coming to the World Forum. It's something to do with the business. And that's we started today to talk about what is the problematic of the climate change actually. Is a business problem, or is it a water problem, or a climate change problem? I try to talk and then with Doreen, but before that, maybe Doreen, you introduce yourself.
Hi, welcome. I'm a professor of anthropology at Northeastern. Jakarta is my hometown. This is where I do research. And I've worked together with Professor Gavin Shatkin over there. I've also known Professor Arun Ganguly from previously. And I am in town for research this month, and I have been invited to participate on this panel. And I'm an anthropologist of urban Indonesia. So I mostly look at economic change and social and cultural change. I'm interested in state politics, and I'm interested in grassroots responses to state politics. So I don't have a formal presentation, but I will probably just share some thoughts of mine after Santoso finishes speaking, because I think what he's going to discuss in terms of the reception, the general reception within Indonesia of more internationalist and globalized ideas about climate change is really important. So I'm just going to give a few examples of what I know about what is happening in Indonesia around different communities, right? And to give some comparative examples of what might be some of the social and cultural factors that we need to think about in shifting a general mindset about what climate change is and what its local impacts are, and what are the points of resistance that are possible within such a landscape. So I'll just give you some of my thoughts later, kind of off the cuff, but I'll turn it back to Santoso.
Thank you. So I just want to talk about two issues. The one is how the discourses, how the discussion about climate change started, and then who are involved, who are, let's say, dominating to say what should be discussed, what should not be discussed. And the second one, we will see what happened on the ground. Is there something connected between what they are discussing and what happened on the ground? And we will see that this is hardly to find a connection between the two things, because the discussion become more and more defined and definitive, but what happened on the ground has become more and more unpredictable. So the question is, how we should understand this phenomenon between the big effort of the international community with the organization of the 150, 160 nation countries, and then today, in the next, I think, 4 days, the next 4 days, they will discuss about 200 programs about water. 200 program water, but defined from these 30,000 people who claim themselves that they are, let's say, qualified to define what to do about water in the next 10 years. So that is the big question. So in the way I coming from behind from the topic what Yo-Yo tried to explain to you today. Okay, next. Yeah, we're going to start how it's began, then what was discussed in the beginning. I will start with the Club of Rome. I think 1974. Okay, yeah. Club of Rome 1972 published, problematic at the end. And then 1 year later is the oil crisis. The price of the oil become $100, more than $120 per barrel. And that is the discussion about the relation between oil, energy, and they try to define, they are worried about the growth. So, okay, it started, the discussion is about growth. Next. The second is, suddenly, the second report of the Club of Rome is about mankind. They say mankind is now in the turning point. They say about, the future of environment, etc., etc. But the view is from the worry about the economic growth. But it's interesting, the statement in the 74. So 2 years after they defined the crisis of energy, they optimistic prognosis. They say many of the factors involved were within human control. And now we should understand, if you jump today, what the so-called international community tried to do is about this human control. They believe. So I try to explain a little bit the position of the people, how they see the problem, and what kind of attitude, what kind of, positioning they have, on that problem. Next. So it started. If you want to know better, you want to know in more detail, you can read it later, we can distribute, but I just want to offer few, to have an overview. With 1980s, they say about discussion about global warming started. Global warming and about the effect on the ecological system of our Earth. Okay, and then already in 1988, they established what they call International Panel on Climate Change. You know? But as interesting statement also, they say that one of the most important for me is that the conclusion that climate change is made by human. So, if you go back a little bit, that is 88. Nah? If you go back, the first statement, you know, all the problem is, all the factor is can be controlled. And now they say climate change by humans. So the one who are produce the problem should control themselves. Is that so? We will see. And then they designed here or conduct the Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention Climate Change. Okay, next. Now they design what discussion a little bit shifting. Each decade a little bit shifting, you know. So they design what is sustainable development and then design what is sustainability. They call sustainability must be our ideological foundation and our for the human, for the whole human, the whole humankind. So the people are very, very convinced themselves, yeah, confident, self-confident. We design something for the humankind. Okay? They say that, okay, what is sustainability should be our common ideological foundation. They believe that this common interest can create an international community that work and collaborate to each other to overcome the problem. That is the belief. These 30,000 people who now coming to Bali, I hope you're not coming to Bali to join them. Huh? You will? No. Better enjoy the Bali. Okay, next. So, sustainability, what should be there? What is our work is sustainable development. Okay, then we are already now the discussion about the sustainable development. Okay? There is another interest statement, yeah? Another interest. This is one of the, what you self-critic is saying that, yeah, how is the humankind itself is unsustainable, you know? So what? Yeah. All this good statement for to provide planetary integrity, yeah, between economic, environment, and social well-being. But on the other side, the one who have to guarantee this integrity is unsustainable. And then we go back to the first statement, yeah, turning point for the humankind. My question is, also is that then the core problem? Is that the core problem that the humankind itself is unsustainable? Later, of this, I will try to describe a little bit just how unpredictable the impact of the climate change. And then the question is this unpredictable impact is because the one who create this problem itself is unpredictable. Okay, next. Okay, skip, next. I already say. Yeah, okay. And then that is the effort to create what we call the international community who should work on this sustainable development. It started as Yo-Yo is already mentioned, Kyoto Protocol, 1990, next. There's another, Earth Summit, 1992, is very, I put only the some point, and then the other thing is the Paris Agreement for the collaborative action. Yeah. Here they put the agenda in Rio 92, and then 2011, 2015 they agree about the action, and then there is the Sustainable Development Goals came out 2015. So again, this organization is self-confident and define what should be done, on the problem of sustainable development, on the program of safe development. So the other is just another effort from them. Yeah. United framework as they design also what they say is COP, Conference of the Parties. That is also, let's say, work division between advanced industrial nation should do this and this, and emerging development countries should do that and that. And then another platform coming out from Paris Agreement, what they call a Durban platform. So, surely that this World Water Convention is also should be developed based on this platform. Okay, next. What is on the ground? Next. On the ground is like this. You see that here a curve of the natural disaster. That is in Canada. Next. That is wildfires. Started in the 80s already, but I just take the highlight that in the last 10 years is in so many countries there are wildfires, and these wildfires normally also followed by deforestation, and that is the list of them. You see. Okay, next. That is the unpredictable extreme European flood. I was 16 years living in Europe, and never I heard a single flood. And suddenly, in 2021, so many. In 2021, Austria, Belgium, Croatia, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Switzerland. And then plus Romania, Italy, Austria, one of the officer of Belgium say, the greatest natural disaster our country has ever known. You know, and then here, the cost. Yeah, the cost is $2.55 billion. Yeah. And a single flood, that is not a one day, that is in the month of July, okay? But that is in one flood. Yeah. The problem is, it is not also the frequency is higher, but also the intensification, the dimension of the disaster is higher. Next. Germany, my second home country. You know, never been. I also never experienced a blackout, for example. But suddenly, a number of German cities, they got a blackout because of this flood. It's not a wildfire, it's just now the flood. Yeah, okay. Property cost $54 billion. And now they're talking in Bali for the World Water Forum about 200 programs. It's about only 10 or 12 billion dollars. The question is the cost of one flood 54 billion euro? And now they have a water program, must be also something to do with the flood. It's only for the 200 program, totally only 10 or 12 billion dollars. I'm asking about the relation, the dimension, about the effort and the cost already. Next. Australia. Oh, Australia. A country with only 25 million people. It's a flood. As the people say, Jakarta flooding, okay, they say, okay, too many people in Jakarta. But Australia, one of the less dense area in the world. Flood. Next. Here, I make a list about the last 10 years in Australia, the flood. You know, from 2013 to December 2033. That is in Australia. And what I found out is in the last half is 50% more flood than in the first half. 50% more flood. Next. That's only number, but I just want to deliver the number. So, and that is the number. A tunnel underground between two malls. So, but that is not in Jakarta or in the developing country, Australia, with the less dense continent, yeah, entire, you know, on the entire world. Next. Okay, drought. Everybody know about that. That's why I'm very quick, Doreen. Drought is Madagascar start very, very miserable. Drought with famine 2021. And drought is one of the very extreme increasing in the last decade on our world. Next. In Horn of Africa, everybody know, you know, the CNN and BBC reported regularly what happened in this very, very, problematic, also climate problematic zone in the world. Now the dimension, 36.4 million affected. 36.4 million. When a drought hit an area, you will have more than 20, sometimes only 5 million, sometimes 10 million, but in all of Africa you have 36. 9.5 million livestock game over. Yeah. And you have 5 million children malnourished because of that, and famine also included. Next, that is the area. Yeah. I think you can study later on. That is. I just want to show the dimension of the crisis. Next. Okay. Then the last detail. The problem is, I think it's not, now we are facing, now we're not discussing about what is the right way to do or not the right way to do. But I think if we talk about adaptation of climate change, for me, the question is that how we can reduce this unpredictable impact. Because even you have 200 programs on water they're discussing now in Bali, what they want to do with the 200 programs. But the problem is, when you don't know where happen, what kind of disaster will happen, where and when. My question is, what is your method to distribute your 200 program on water? How do you do it? Because for me it's a priority. Adaptation should be reduced. Should be reduce the disaster. If you cannot do that, then your money is just thrown for nothing. Because that, the 200 program they define as the right program, cannot help the people who are affected through this unpredictable impact. That for me is just useless. Because the most important question is to help the people how to prepare yourself that you can adapt the crisis in a better way if they are coming. Am I right or not? Am I right or not? If you, okay, you have a definition of sustainable development and they think we are on the right track if we distribute the 200 programs now in the next 4 days in Bali, following our criteria. For me it's just nonsense. No. What we have to do is to prepare the people that if the disaster coming, they are more prepared to, that they are more able to reduce the impact. That is the right way to do. So now I give over to Doreen, because our idea is, I and Doreen discuss about this, our idea is the most important thing is to prepare the community. Is as a city or a village, etc. the money should be, if we have money, the money should be used to increase the capability of the people to react on the right way if disaster hits them. So, Doreen, it's your turn.
I have a question on that. So, what you just said is a very interesting perspective, right? And I think many of us would agree.
Sorry, I'm 67. You have 76.
I can go up if you wish, or
Yeah. I have only 30% of my capacity.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you. This was wonderful. My question is the following. What you're saying, first of all, is very interesting. Many of us would agree. But in terms of how the world of research and translation of research is progressing right now, it's almost reversed, right? So if you think of, let's say, advances in natural systems, human engineered systems, social systems, it's almost, the idea almost is that there are some things that communities cannot control almost, right? So if there are this major land use change or, greenhouse gas emissions, that is something that needs these intergovernmental programs and things like that to be able to control. That's the current thinking. And then communities often seems to come last, right? So how has this situation evolved? And if we do not agree that there should be this kind of privatization, I'm not saying that top-down, bottom-up, both are important or not important, both will be important, but there is so much less focus on community scales. So how do you see, based on your experience, how do you see this changing? Do you see this changing? What needs to be done for this to change?
Just a short answer, because maybe the discussion should be started after Doreen's presentation. So, as I worked in the last 10 years, 15 years, community-based development, but in tourism. But what I learned from that is that the people are, if the people on the ground, the community are aware about what kind of challenge they have to face if the impact of the climate change hit them. If the big advantage is the collaboration capability is already automatically there. And if you see how this international community try to collaborate and then to set up a program, and then I cannot imagine, that such kind of forum of 30,000 people, can have the time to carry out the problem on the ground, because between themselves it is already very, very difficult. I just want to underline that many thinkers, sociologists, and so people like very critical about the concept of modernization, is try to underline that it is very important that the international community is increasing their capability to collaborate. So what I see is that in the last 20 or the 30 years, there is no advance in their capability to collaborate to each other. But we should not discuss about why the reason. And then I see on the community on the ground that there is no problem at all for them. It's very easy for the people in one village or even in one city to collaborate to each other. I think the common interest is there, you know. So that is the advantage I see. But let's say, okay, we should a little bit, delay the discussion. Okay, Doreen.
Thank you. I don't have a formal presentation prepared, but I thought I'd share some examples of what Yo was talking about how it might seem easy to actually affect change on the ground. So if the overview that Yo gave, which is a history of the kind of multilateral international agreements that have been achieved, right, over the last 5-6 decades or so, is the pinnacle, right, of kind of technocratic regime in which legally binding agreements are in fact the goal. So they have been achieved, right? So all of these conferences become points of reference and set legal precedents that then are actually not actionable or do not actually affect penalties, right? These are legally binding, but not enforceable. So that kind of distinction, I think, is something to think about here, wherein each nation state is still within its sovereign rights to decide what are its policies, right? And where the legal loopholes are. And what is in the national interest to develop, whether it's to take advantage of natural resources, right? Whether it's to continue long-standing agreements with private corporations. Indonesia just renewed Freeport's concessions for another few decades. For example, one of the largest mines in the world in Papua. If that is then the pinnacle of what is visible as a kind of politically organized movement to address climate change, then I think we are ignoring a lot of local examples where people are kind of weighing the costs and benefits of what is happening and what they can decide to reject or accept. So, to go back to the earlier presentation that we heard by Yo-Yo about degrowth in Spain. Why is degrowth a radical idea? What do we accept? And at Northeastern, I teach a class called Global Markets, Global Cultures very often. And there's a whole section on greenwashing, and there's a whole section on ethical consumption that students really love to talk about, right? Because this is your life, these are the choices you're making. You'll pay a higher price, right, for the benefit of an ethical outcome. You feel good when you consume because you know that the product you're consuming has been sustainably produced or is benefiting indigenous communities and so on and so forth, right? So those are not radical ideas. They seem vaguely anti-capitalist, but they're not really radical ideas. So an idea like degrowth or remaining small is perhaps what is truly radical in this landscape of a political economy geared towards year-on-year growth. So if you watch CNBC, if you watch the financial news, what is a point of concern is year-on-year economic growth, right? And so the period of environmental destruction that we heard about in Indonesia under the dictatorial regime had year-on-year growth of at least 10% per annum. So it looked great from the outside, right? And yet the kind of externalities that we're talking about, the kind of environmental impact is also quite concentrated during that time. So I've been doing some research in a kind of small proto-industrial village called Jatiwangi in Majalengka district in West Java. It's near the port city of Cirebon, and it's a very kind of interconnected set of maybe 5 villages in a cluster that has produced maybe one of Indonesia's most famous arts collectives. They go to Documenta They might be invited, the musicians they're invited to play at South by Southwest, right? They travel internationally as internationally well-known artists. But what kind of art do they make? They make art that emphasizes local culture. And local culture in that sense is local industry. And so this is a village that has, for the last 100+ years, made glazed ceramic roof tiles. So if you go around Jakarta, or around the world actually, and you see roofs that have those glazed tiles made of clay, that clay comes from Mandalika. The clay comes from Jatiwangi, and they have these old machines. They're very beautiful. Some of them are Italian from like the 1940s, 50s, 60s, that crank out piece by piece clay that is then fired using firewood in these very large kind of home industry factories. So the village is not rural, it's kind of proto-industrial, right? It's a mixed-use village. And this is the kind of local culture that people are hoping to sustain because they already have a home industry that is nonetheless affected by high rates of unemployment, by people flocking to the cities, so the young people don't want to farm or they might not want to work there anymore, and so they move to the big cities to work. Right, so there's a kind of decimation of local culture that people are worried about, and this arts collective has somehow managed to build consensus and political consensus amongst the local leaders, the religious leaders, the teachers at the school, the local police, to try to highlight local culture. And one of their taglines is, so that we do not become like Jakarta. And that's a kind of massive rejection of the future that they don't want. They don't want that urban future. They don't want the model of economic growth where if you look around Jakarta, you'll see lots of skyscrapers, you'll see a lot of vertical living, you'll see, the highlight is the new mass rapid transit system, right? A lot of malls. That's not quite the future they want. And in this place of, let's say, a few 100,000 people, they have managed as a society to cultivate that feeling. And it can be small. They do small pilot projects like waste management, right, at the collective level. They do programs about music and arts that involves the entire school. So they'll do a mass concert where they take ceramic tiles that have been produced locally as a musical instrument and they play on it, right? And there are these orchestras of 1,000 people, and they've been on national TV, they've been in documentaries. And the point being that there are these pockets where the model is not a hero. There's no local leader who emerges as a hero, which if you watch, documentaries often, there's a local figure who kind of emerges as a visionary. But no, this is just ordinary people in a town in West Java who are very cosmopolitan, who invite people like you, students maybe, to come stay in their homes. And they have very simple homes. There might be dirt floors. But the concept is they live and they work and they eat and they pray together. And that's the kind of spirit of community that still exists, I think, in a lot of places in Indonesia today that is facing a massive challenge of environmental destruction. And so I think one of the questions we need to think about is the kinds of differences within many societies wherein the elite make political and economic and environmental decisions for the rest of us. Right? So what do those elite look like? What do they care about? Why is the point person, the kind of head minister under the current president in Indonesia inviting Elon Musk to have private meetings all the time? Right? So I think the general landscape of thinking about the potential for social change at the bottom means looking beyond the headlines a little bit and kind of this morning we've unpacked a little bit about what the green energy industry is doing to sell its products, right? And one of, I think, the things that didn't come up yet is the fact that regionally, who produces green energy matters. And in the case of Indonesia, one of the largest producers and marketers of green energy are Chinese firms, state-sponsored Chinese firms under the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So we can start to see regional patterns that matter for a lot of the world, where we have to kind of think about, how do you conduct an analysis of new forms of hegemony and domination, right? It's not just the West that's the enemy, or the US that's the enemy. That's not true. There are a lot of new players, and there are a lot of old players as well in Europe, for example, who don't emerge as kind of historical enemies, right? But nonetheless are contributing to changing the landscape rather irrevocably. So what I do in my research is try to pay attention to local factors where there's interesting stuff happening. So there's a kind of synergy or symbiosis. So what I'm trying to think about right now on this trip to Jakarta is, what is an urban forest? Because that's attractive to people, to think about, how do you create these pockets, right, of carbon capture, especially in a very urban environment. Do you have to plan it? Do you have to wait 10 years for city planners to achieve, the kinds of regulations or agreements in order to create a little pocket park, right? So under the previous governor of Jakarta, there was a large expansion of the park system, but these were arid parks without trees, right? They're parks for skateboarding, middle-class activities, or bike lanes, right? This is not greening. This is kind of the replication of a sustainable lifestyle that seems attractive to urbanites. But what I've observed so far, and this is pretty interesting for Jakarta, and I think the folks at UNTAR maybe have more to say about this, is that there are a lot of abandoned houses and empty lots all over the city. And because of the tropical climate, the moment there is no human inhabitant in the house, it starts to decay. You get mold, you get critters, you get trees sprouting from rooftops. So pay attention when you're on your car or your bus going around Jakarta or Bali or wherever you are, that the signs of environmental reclamation that are happening in areas with dense human habitat are there, right? So it's pretty interesting to me that in a city like this, which is very polluted, very dense, you have these little pockets, and they're not man-made pocket parks. They are kind of abandoned spaces where there has been regrowth or reclamation, and that's stayed empty for a pretty long time, and people live with that landscape as a kind of normalized landscape, and it's a little bit different from the discourse we have in the U.S. about urban blight, right? Where if you see like a graffiti area, or if you see a boarded up house, it's considered a kind of aberration that needs to be addressed. But in a city such as Jakarta, there's a kind of mixed-use feeling about the landscape or the streetscape, where not everything has to look manicured or perfect. But there are all these in-between landscapes where you start to see trees growing where they shouldn't be growing, right? Or you start to see a kind of sudden, dense green area that is not planned. And those are the kinds of possibilities that I think that if we paid attention to, without the framework of economic growth and without the framework of sustainable development, you start to see that actually stuff is happening that's interesting, that doesn't require a lot of concept work to appreciate. Right? So birds will bring seeds and then they'll drop them where they go, or other species will bring things, and then you'll start to see these things pop up around the city. And I think that's perhaps a kind of a weird thing that an anthropologist might notice, that an urban planner might not notice, right? But it's these moments of possibility where I think actually a city space such as Jakarta might have some moments of mitigation that are unplanned. And this might counter a little bit some of that unpredictability that Mario was talking about, where the sense of crisis that comes with a flood attacking a kind of perfect German town, right? That sense of destruction, about the loss of civilization that occurs when that happens, is not present in a non-perfect landscape like Jakarta, which is not manicured, which is not tended, which is very uneven. So I would say to you as well, as you're traveling around Indonesia, try to see the landscape a little bit differently about what those possibilities afford, right? Instead of what is lacking. And that's the kind of flip of the framework that might be also interesting to think about. So I'll stop there to see if there are any more questions or ideas at this point about what was shared so far.
Now, you're asking the student. Oh, Gavin, do you have a comment?
I just wanted to kind of, first of all, on the little urban forests, I looked out my window at the JW Marriott this morning, and there's one right there.
Right, right. It's covered with vines. I know exactly. There's a cavern right there.
No, and I just want to circle, you gave a really beautiful example of a kind of anti-growth, or was it anti-growth? Is that the term that you used? Of actual practice. But I wanted to kind of circle that back to Arup's question about, the way that knowledge is being used and science is being used in this moment, and ask whether, we really need to think of it at an anti-growth mode of the application of science, and ask about who's funding a lot of the research that is ongoing around climate change mitigation and adaptation, and ask a question like, what if we were to put the control of the deployment of the hard sciences and engineering and so on in the hands of a community like the one that you described, or in the hands of other communities that I'll talk a little bit about later in my discussion on Jakarta. So in other words, what is our complicity in what you're discussing, and what is a path forward for a different way of being academics and being a university like Northeastern?
So I'll answer a question briefly, which is to say our point of complicity might be aesthetic. A lot of us care about what places look like, right? So our urban campus in Northeastern, the flagship campuses look a certain, the buildings, the newest buildings look a certain way, right? There's a kind of expectation about aesthetics that I think needs to be a little bit disturbed, because that sense of what development looks like, or what sustainable development looks like if it's an LEED certified green building, right? And it costs billions of dollars to build and maintain, is the point of our complicity, right? Which I think we like what those look like. If we add, roof gardens, I think we're satisfied with that. And if we have rainwater, runoff that we capture, I think we're kind of satisfied with the attraction, again, of ethical consumption. So that's one of the ideological points, I think, where we have to think about the forms of private capture and the commodification of potentially radical ideas, which are then sold back to us in a very watered-down form. Lots of people that I know at Northeastern work on citizen science. So Sarah Wiley, for example, who's currently at the White House on kind of energy fellowship, she works on fracking. So if you haven't read her book on fracking in the US, you should. She writes a lot about those kinds of seismic disasters that are produced in your backyard because people sell off the contracts to their land to these kind of private energy companies. I think the potential for citizen science is there, definitely. There needs to be a lot of translation up and down, but I think integrating an analysis of what kinds of ideologies of growth and the good life get internalized also matters. So do people want to live in houses? Do they want to live in apartments with swimming pools? Do they want to farm? Maybe not. Right? What do people want, and how are those ideas and desires tied to an overall vision of where we are going? So I think those are the points at which we examine our goals and our methods to get there, right? To figure out for ourselves what is enough. And there are lots of points of economic precarity that I think young people are worried about today. And it's not even about owning a level of human intervention that can take place?
So before, I think I owe you a little bit now maybe to underline something what I think it is something to do with my own struggle about the question of climate change. So, my big problem myself is that if we careful study what is announced by the international community, international organization dealing with climate change, I come to a conclusion that they are not intending what we need as to improve the capacity of the people on the ground dealing with the impact of the climate change. This question is not on the table, is not on the program. What they are working for, what they also between themselves is not an agreement to each other, is that they want to limit the increasing temperature to, they say, between the optimistic say 3.5, the pessimistic say 5 degrees in the next 50 years. So it's me, that is the main program of the international organization community, is to stop the global warming. My question is, if you see the table I tried to put together, my question is, how much disaster between today and they stop the increasing? Look, the logic is this, that the impact is already there and will be worse and worse because they will allow, the program allow the increasing of temperature to 3.5 until 5 degrees. So the unpredictable, what I want to say is, how much disaster more will happen between today to the day we are able to stop the increasing temperature, and how much is to compare what already we have today. My friend Malik said to me, do you know, 1 degree, I didn't know where they got, so he's getting the number. 1 degree increasing means that so and so many agricultural land will be damaged. So the question is, what we are doing if we allow the temperature is increasing until 3.5 and to 5 degrees. And the problem is we cannot expect, we cannot also forecast also where the next agriculture become destroyed. So the only way I think is now, if we are really care about the situation, the impact for the people, is that we should immediately start to increase the capacity of the people.
And then coming to places like India, Indonesia, Brazil, right, the so-called global south. So in the US, it's the right? It's the extreme right sometimes, or just the right, which is trying to stop action on climate change. There was a report that some of us started to write. I was asked to join that team. It was on sustainable national climate assessment. in the US. And this was in the previous administration, and at some point the president stopped that report. Just said it's not happening, axed it. Scientists still got together and wrote something, but that's not the same if it does not have a federal mandate. So from there, what is happening from the extreme right is, or maybe not so extreme anymore, from the right is these global scale efforts and things like that, or even some of these national scale efforts, they are stopping development, they are anti-growth, whatever it is, and that's the perception. We don't need to do that. It's communism or socialism by another name. There, some countries are trying to take our money and do stuff. All kinds of perceptions from that. Then when I come to, let's say, the so-called global south, it's in the left. From the left that I often get pushback, or we, and I am just, who am I, just collectively. We often get pushback saying this is neo-colonialism of some sort, where you are saying you have to do this, right? And the question that is, the left who say that, they may have leftist ideology in these countries, but within these global south countries, there are still elites, right? And they are probably not seeing the fact that the people who are most impacted are the ones who are not elites in these underdeveloped or emerging economies. It just gets missed. So with this background, questions to you, my questions to you and for all the students would be, what can we learn from each other, right, in terms of these developed and developing economies? What are those actions that are more feels good? This has been argued, this is not something I'm making up, right? Some people have said, well, some actions feels good, but they don't really make any impact in something, versus some actions really make impact. How do we define that? How do we understand that? Do we have any guidance for that? I'm thinking especially from the social scientists and economics and others who can contribute, right? And when you talk about unpredictability, right? Maybe it's limits to predictability, maybe we are not looking at the right problem, but will community efforts alone, in exclusion of other things, address that predictability problem? So a lot of questions here, but just wanted to throw them out, and I would strongly encourage the students to ask questions.
Yeah, come on. Nice question. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk today. My question is, in your last segment, you discussed increasing the capacity of people, and so how would you suggest going about that?
Another question maybe in that direction?
Or just comments are welcome.
Comment is also welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, but I start to very simple, how to increase the capability. Yeah, we have to go back about what's really happened. If we talk about how many degrees should be allowed to increase or not to increase, we are not talking about the reason of the climate crisis or the global warming. The reason of the global warming is nothing else than the damage happened on the local specific socio-ecological system. The damage is locally. what we were talking about global warming, that is the impact. The impact of the deterioration of the socio-ecological system on the ground. So, back a little bit to the lecture from Yo-Yo. Here we should maybe talking about socio-ecological metabolism. What is socio-ecological metabolism? Is nothing else than how the people organize the production, the reproduction, how they organize their livelihood, everyday livelihood. That is the core of the things. And why community, we thought that community is much more easier to organize, because they are involved in this everyday life and they are involved in organizing production and the reproduction, in their metabolism, by Yo-Yo say. So, how to increase? How to increase is try, we call about resistance in this context. Yeah, the resistance of the metabolism system against climate change. Also, it's very different than what we are talking about now. The international community is trying to reduce the impact of this, what we call it, damage. Yeah? The damage happened, so they don't care about that. They say, okay, the emission is everything, so we have to reduce the emission. But the question is, it is not locally defined that, if you reduce the climate, if you reduce the global warming, if you reduce the increasing of the world temperature, Earth temperature, that it is guaranteed. There is, I know you cannot guarantee the process of destruction. The process of destruction will happen and happen, and that is only if you increase, the attention of the people, that you work with the people, as though the people itself know what is important, what is not important in organizing the production or the reproduction. They know it because they are involved. So if you're asking how to increase that, yeah, okay, we maybe can be a mediator that people climate aware, climate change aware. So what we, in the normal discussion, I think Pak Kemal can contribute something about that, what we call the resilience, So I think this discussion on the resilience and adaptation is become more and more important. Okay, that's all.
I'll just answer our earlier question briefly about this kind of political split between the so-called global north and global south and whose turn it is, right? So 100 years ago or after the Industrial Revolution, so let's say the 19th century and onwards, the global north had its turn in terms of polluting the planet, right? And so now then you might see a kind of stance in which global south countries might say the constraints, right, the new political restraints on environmental damage is a form, again, of neocolonial control, right? And this kind of is an incursion into a sovereign economic space that each country is supposed to control, right? Don't tell us what to do and how much carbon to produce. It's our turn, right? Because we want to grow and we want to move from a lower middle income country into a middle income country and so on and so forth. We want our turn to be rich too, right? That's the kind of nationalist response that you might hear governments give. I would say if we look beyond that a little bit and we look at countries like the US, I would not say it's the far right that is against environmental protections. I mean, we have to look at it as a class, right? So all of the campus movements against divestment, including on Northeastern, are about class interests of who owns shares in what, right? And that is not divided by where you are on the political spectrum. It's where you gain your dividends from. And people all across the political spectrum own shares in things that produce some form of environmental externality. So I think that's important too in countries like India or China or Indonesia to think about that the political class shares collective interests in a certain maintenance of a level of growth, right? And so if I think you're on a field trip later this afternoon, is that right, to Pantai Indah, where you will start to see the scale of development in Indonesia, just on Java alone. The scale of urban planning that is private, right, which Professor Shatkin works on, is beyond what you can imagine. You've never seen it before in the US, right? They can build a new town today, and they'll build a new town tomorrow, and they'll keep going for the next few decades, right? And that's all privatization, including reclamation of land. So you can destroy the interior of the island while reclaiming land and building it out, and changing the topography of the nation. It's wild. It's totally wild that you can do this. And Boston, of course, is also built on reclaimed land. So all of Back Bay, for instance, is reclamation, right? So we live with this. We live with this. And we understand that the kind of human manipulation of our landscape is in line with a certain level of capital and class reproduction, right? So I would say to the original question that Professor Gahui posed of what is going on where in the Global South, we might look at why it would be and where environmental activists are criminalized. So in Indonesia, they're definitely criminalized. In China, environmental lawyers are criminalized, right, and go into exile. In Indonesia, media platforms like Manga Bay, which do big journalistic exposés of environmental damage caused by the mining industry, for example, are criminalized and targeted. So we have to see, I think, beyond particular so-called country positions and think about the divisions within each place where there's a huge contestation about stuff like what is good for us, right? And who gets to say what and who is silenced. And certainly in this country, there have been a lot of very local activists who are criminalized and thrown in prison on libel laws, for instance, for speaking out against local politicians or local mining concessions and so on and so forth. So really paying attention to the community level tells us some of this.
It's very interesting discussion. That's the time. We have time.
We have time
For the lunch.
Okay, so we should go for the lunch?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. I have a quick comment before we go. So can you all hear me? Who's there? Ellery, can you hear me from that?
Hello?
Can you all hear me?
All right. First of all, thanks to both of you for these discussions. And to the students, this is your opportunity. I know we are sometimes a bit tired, jet-lagged, etc., but this is your opportunity to interact and ask questions. These are very difficult opportunities to get. Thank you so much. Well, we can get her. She's Northeastern, right? So we can still ask her questions. But people here and there. It's very difficult to get this kind of opportunity. One other thing, while we go for lunch, what I would not like to see is Northeastern students gathering on one side
and the Managara students gathering on one side. So each group should have a good collection. So we have 31 Northeastern students. I'm not counting the PAs yet. The job of the PAs is of course to enable this. So I'm not counting you guys. Not really about it. But so far we have 31 undergraduate students here to our student council that are really well. So for how many, if I can get a show of hands, how many students are from here, Indonesia, Kalimantan? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, okay, 14 students. I think all of you, thank you so much. Since they raised their hands, you could see them. And clearly, there is already a divide. The Indonesian students are sitting somewhere, and you guys are sitting somewhere, which is initially expected. But during lunch, please introduce yourself to each other. And let us not have a single table where there is just Northeastern or just Al Managara.